What if fragility isn't weakness? What if softness is actually strength? And what if poetry understands human emotions better than we do ourselves? Hello, literature lovers. Today we are diving into the close reading of our powerful poem, Family Fragile, Yin and Yang, using the VAPR theory. Let's have a listen. Family Fragile. In the yin-yangs of the current gentle sway lies our fragile moment of bravery that family echoes. Endless despairing voices yearn to be voiced out. A fragile whisper here craves for a firm side there. Our shadows sharply visible in the flickering light, awaiting a flaring light to brighten our smiles. Trust me, trying to balance that faith and fear is more like a silent dream that promises firmness in fragility. Guess what? Though we might be held softly in time's delicate clasp, we shall still stand with our fragile truth yet firm in its grasp. For in this yin-yang subtle art, we shall find our strength, forever firmly intertwined. Right, a quick insight. VAPR theory is a way of reading poetry that explores not just what a poem means, but how it sounds, breathes, pauses, and lives inside the reader. For my new listeners and literature lovers, VAPR stands for Voice, Authorial Presence, Pause, Reader Experience. In simple terms, VAPR studies how poetry becomes a sensory experience. As poetry is never just words on a page, it's rhythm, silence, memory, tension, feeling, and most importantly, the meaning is not fixed. Why, you may ask? Because the reader helps create it. Now, let's unpack the VAPR analysis in the poem Family Fragile. Stage 1. Experiential reading. Reading becomes emotional, sensory, and psychologically embodied through the paradoxical pairing of the words family and fragile. Once again, what if fragility isn't weakness? What if softness is actually strength? These lines invite readers into a reflective emotional space where vulnerability becomes empowering rather than diminishing. The reader experiences the poem internally, recognizing personal emotional contradictions such as strength within pain, calm within chaos, and resilience within sensitivity. The poem, therefore, becomes an emotional encounter rather than a simple intellectual message. You might have noticed that this poem repeats two powerful words again and again: fragile, firm. This contrast becomes the emotional heartbeat of the poem. It tells us something deeply human, that you can tremble and still survive. You can feel broken and still be strong. And that you can be soft and still endure. And guess what? That's the yin-yang philosophy flowing through the poem. Which I bet it signals to us that opposites coexist, not fighting each other, but completing each other. Stage 2. Voice. The sound of emotion. The voice in the poem is reflective and emotionally intimate. Rather than speaking with solid assurance, the voice questions, meditates, and invites self-examination. And what if poetry understands human emotions better than we do ourselves? You might have noticed that the interrogative structure in this poem creates a conversational tone that draws readers inward. The voice does not impose meaning. Instead, it guides emotional discovery. Through repetition and contrast, the voice mirrors the instability and complexity of human emotion, making the poem psychologically layered. The line says, "A fragile whisper here craves for a firm sigh there." Listen to that carefully. The softness of the sounds almost whispers itself aloud. That's what VAPR calls voice, the emotional soundscape of poetry that pulls beneath the words. Stage 3. Authorial presence. The poet's fingerprint. Authorial presence emerges through themes of emotional duality, vulnerability, healing, and self-awareness. The poem reflects contemporary discussions surrounding mental health, emotional intelligence, inner balance, and human sensitivity. The reference to yin and yang introduces a philosophical and symbolic context, suggesting that opposites coexist naturally. Strength and weakness, firmness and fragility, silence and expression, pain and healing. The authorial intention appears to challenge traditional views that associate fragility with failure. Instead, emotional openness becomes a form of strength. Now look at the imagery in the poem. Flickering light, flaring light. The poem moves from uncertainty to hope, from emotional instability to illumination. That's not accidental. That's the poet shaping emotional movement through symbolism. Even the capitalization matters, by the way. Firmly fragile, shall. Those words visually demand attention. They become emotional landmarks inside the poem. Stage 4. Pause. The power of silence. Pause is central to the poem's emotional structure. Short, fragmented sentences and deliberate spacing create moments of silence and contemplation. Like mentioned, it's the rhythm, the silence, the memory, the tension, and the feeling. These pauses slow down reading and allow emotional absorption. Silence becomes meaningful alongside language. The interruptions and spacing create emotional suspension, encouraging readers to reflect on their own experiences while reading. In VAPR theory, these pauses become interpretive spaces where meaning deepens. Now here's my favorite part of VAPR theory, that is pause. The poem constantly uses ellipses. Those lingering dots create emotional suspension, as I've mentioned. They force reflection, and suddenly silence becomes meaningful because sometimes poetry speaks loudest in the pause, not in what is said, but in what lingers afterward. Stage 5. Reader experience. This is where reading becomes personal. Meaning in this poem is ultimately completed through the reader's emotional and social context, as some may put. Modern readers may connect the poem to mental health awareness, emotional vulnerability, identity struggles, modern loneliness, healing and self-discovery, social pressure to appear strong. Different readers interpret fragility differently depending on personal experience. So the question is, what are you experiencing right now? For some, the poem becomes therapeutic, for others, philosophical, and for others, empowering. Thus, meaning remains fluid and historically situated because readers actively participate in constructing interpretation. So, do you care to interpret this poem in your own way? I challenge you to do so. In conclusion, VAPR theory reveals that firmly fragile yin and yang poem constructs meaning through emotional voice, reflection, pause, contradiction, and reader participation. The poem transforms reading into a sensory experience where silence, repetition, and vulnerability become central tools of meaning making. Rather than presenting fragility as weakness, the poem redefines it as a necessary and powerful dimension of human existence. So you may ask, why VAPR theory? How does it matter to poetry lovers? There you go. VAPR theory, especially for you, literary enthusiasts and poetry lovers maybe, too often literary analysis becomes mechanical, too focused on correct meaning. But poetry is alive. VAPR theory helps us appreciate all the in-between, the tone, the imagery, the silence, the emotional tension, the reader interpretation, all at once. It transforms poetry from something we simply analyze into something we experience. For close reading, VAPR theory sharpens attention to diction, symbolism, pacing, tonal shifts, structural tension, emotional resonance, but unlike rigid criticism, it keeps the emotional soul of poetry intact. Because literature is not just academic, it's human. VAPR theory speaks both to scholars and everyday readers. Whether you're a student, a literary critic, a spoken word artist, or simply someone who loves language, VAPR theory invites you into poetry instead of placing poetry above you. In reflection, so maybe fragility isn't the opposite of strength. Maybe fragility is where strength begins. Maybe the softest parts of ourselves are the parts that are still fighting to survive. And maybe poetry matters because it gives language to emotions we struggle to explain. And that is the spirit of VAPR theory. Until next time, keep reading deeply, keep feeling honestly, and keep finding meaning between the lines. That's all I have for you today. Kindly share this podcast with your family and friends. Bye.